Hello, everybody. It's the Bearded Realtor, and it's time for our podcast number 3. And today we have a great guest that we're going to be talking to, learning more about. He's a local business owner, and so he owns at least, 2 locations, and it's Dethrone Martial Arts. So anyway, go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Jason Kraft, owner of Dethrone Mixed Martial Arts. Like Greg was saying, we have 2 locations in town. One that's in the Clovis area, technically Fresno, but it services the Clovis area over on Clovis Avenue. And then we actually have a relatively new location. We started out at Bearded Marks, and then we ended up about 1.5 years, almost 2 years. Actually, it's about 2 years in July. This month, end of this month, we moved up to Marks and Shaw,
Right.
over by Target, that shopping center over there. We kind of expanded the operations a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's working out really well. Like I said, we've been there about 2 years now, so it's going great.
Yeah, one thing about that location, there is a substation right next door.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of police going in
Yeah.
and out. When I used to sit there about 5:30 in the morning, I felt very safe.
Yeah, that's
Well, very
nice,
good.
That's a nice little benefit.
Yeah, really. Do any of them come over and starting to train or anything?
Here and there.
Yeah.
I went over there, obviously, when we first opened up. I wanted to, try to get a lot of them to come over and sign up as members because, a lot of them have families. And,
Yeah.
we can draw all types of different people, whether it's, officers that want to work on their, it's their life actually on the line, work on their self-defense, or, they have kids and stuff like that as well. So
Yeah.
we have a lot of areas where we could draw with our business model. So some of them will come over. But yeah,
And we'll get to that a little bit later. You have such a great kids program there, so we'll get to that. But let's talk about, first of all, how young are you? I don't like to say how old you are.
I just turned 51.
Oh my goodness, does he look good for 51? Wow.
June 14th.
Wow.
So
Wow.
51 years old on June 14th.
And you grew up in New York.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit, what was life for Jason Kraft growing up in New York?
So I was born in Queens,
Queens.
New York. So if anyone, listeners know about New York, Queens is one of the 5 boroughs of New York City.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of inner city. So I grew up with, inner city, no grass, all concrete, living in an apartment building with my mother.
Any other siblings?
No, to start, it was me. I was the oldest, firstborn. And it was just me and my mom until I was about 5 years old. And I grew up in the concrete jungle, and back then it's I think I reflect to this day and age, but I was out running around the streets at 4 or 5 years old, where I was out playing with other kids on the other blocks and running around, and we were 4, 5, 6 years old, running around Queens with cars going all over the place, and I almost got hit by a car like a bunch of times. It was kind of crazy when I think about today because, you would never let your kids even out of your house. Nowadays, everything is so much more hands-on with parents and stuff.
Yeah.
But I remember growing up back in the 70s and the 80s, we were pretty independent. I know a lot of kids, we were out and about all day long playing and stuff like that.
Was it, did you have any fears about running around? Evidently
I
not.
didn't. It's all I knew. I was actually out. I mean, I think about it now. I was teaching myself how to ride a bicycle, I remember, in Queens, and just trying to get up on a bike at like maybe 4 or 5 years old, and kind of like people were trying to get to work and everything in their suits and walking around. And it was just what I knew. I was a kid. I had a lot of energy. I wanted to get out and play, and I wasn't going to stay cooped up in an apartment.
Did you have the attitude that you were fearless? I mean, were you afraid of anything?
I can't really remember back then, but I think I was. I mean, I didn't know anything else, and I think the other kids in the neighborhoods didn't know anything either. We were all out of our apartments, running around the streets playing. We were there till I was going into my second, I was going into the second grade. Because I remember clearly being in the first grade, I had a teacher named Mrs. Friedheim, and I remember she was introducing our next president of the United States, and that was Ronald Reagan.
Oh, wow.
So that memory sticks with me, her saying, "Hey, class, do you guys know who the president is? We got a new president." And she had a picture of Ronald Reagan, and she introduced him and stuff like that. I remember that memory. And then what the catalyst was for me to move to Long Island. So I ended up growing up on Long Island, which is all suburbs, similar to Fresno, Clovis. You know,
Okay.
with fields and grass and,
Okay.
and, you know,
How old were you when you?
Well, I had just started the second grade. I remember I got pulled
Okay.
out, and then we moved to Long Island. But the catalyst there was, one day I was on my stoop. We call it the stoop. I don't know if people are
No,
familiar with what that is.
explain that,
When you
'cause I don't
walk-
know what it
When you
is.
go to an apartment building, the walkway going into the apartment building is called the stoop.
Okay.
That's what we call it. And I was on the stoop with another kid. I heard a scream off in the distance, and I remember there was an elderly lady. She was screaming, and two guys were grabbing her purse, and they were ripping it out of her arms. And she was screaming, and I was on the stoop watching. So they ripped the purse away from her, and they started running. And as they were running, the guy had a gun out, and he pulled the gun out on me when I was like second grade. I don't know, 6 years old, 7 years old, and his guy he was running with was saying, "Shoot him, shoot him, shoot him."
No
and
way.
as he was running, he had the gun and he kept going. He obviously never shot. Maybe he was just trying to scare me or whatever. And I remember the kid next to me, he went down, but I froze. And I remember to this day to have the memory, because I went and a couple blocks down, the cops they were underneath the car, and the cops found them and they were pulling them out from under the car. And I remember very shortly after that, boop, we moved to Long Island, which was going to be a much better area, less crime and things like that. So we got out of the inner city and we ended up moving to Long Island, New York, which is a suburban area with good schools. So that was a huge thing in my life. I mean, I don't think I'd be where I'm at right now if I would have grew up in the New York City public school system. No way.
Yeah.
No way. Especially not in wrestling, because they don't have any wrestlers in the inner city. They
Yeah.
have good basketball and good football players and things like that, but the sports programs aren't anything close to what they are in Long Island, which is like,
Yeah.
being in like a Clovis schools,
Yeah.
where you have really strong sports programs and stuff like that.
I want to talk a little bit more. I'm going to ask you a question, but I want to talk a little bit more. Go back to your family, but so we know, when did you start wrestling?
I started wrestling in the seventh grade.
Seventh grade.
And what happened was I remember my mother took me to wrestling when I was actually in like the fourth or fifth grade. I think it was the fourth grade. And because at the time I loved wrestling, but I loved WWE, WWF wrestling. And to me, I was a huge fan of like Hulk Hogan, the British Bulldogs growing up in the 80s. That's what wrestling was to me.
Yeah.
So my mother, wanted to sign me up for wrestling, and I was a very athletic kid when I was a youngster in the neighborhood, and the way it worked was, and I know people probably around my age and your age, when we were kids, we were out in the neighborhood playing with the other kids. Nowadays, you don't see that anymore,
No.
right? But when we were kids, it was, you're out, you come in to go to the bathroom, or you come in to get something to eat, bye mom, and you're out the door. So we all the kids would get together, and it was just kind of a Lord of the Flies situation where there's bullies, there's all types of different kids.
Yeah.
And what we did in the neighborhood where I grew up is we were very active with sports. So we would play kill the guy with the football, we would play soccer, we would play hockey a lot. That's a big thing back in New York. Hockey was huge.
That's interesting. You wonder if the kids today, if you were to bring up those games, if the kids today would even know that, because
No.
now that you say that, when I show a lot of homes, right? I go up and down the streets and I'm typically not seeing kids.
No.
Very seldom do you
see
see kids on bikes anymore.
I don't see it.
And our parents, probably same with you, if you were inside the home, they says, hey, go outside, get
We didn't have
outside.
video games either.
Yeah,
I mean,
true.
Atari started, I think, when I was probably in sixth grade or something like that. I remember getting my first Atari and playing that, and Donkey Kong and Coleco and all that
Yeah.
stuff. But obviously you're a little older than me. You didn't have video games at all, so you guys were out and about.
No.
And I was the same way growing up. And for me, I always idolized, baseball, professional baseball players, and NFL, and I always promised myself I was going to play in the NFL one day. That was my dream, and that's who I looked up to. Those were my heroes.
Yeah.
Growing up as a young kid, and I was out very active. But the question was about wrestling. So going back to that, my mother signed me up for wrestling at a club, which was at the local club, and brought me in there, and I thought it was going to be real wrestling. I didn't think it was going to be this fake wrestling, which wasn't any fun. You know, for me, real wrestling was the WWE and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, and it was. I just remember the room was really hot, and I remember just getting cradled, and I was like, "This sucks." I quit right away. So right
It
away,
wasn't
I told
the wrestling you were expecting.
it wasn't the wrestling I was expecting. It
Yeah.
was, real wrestling. But to me, real wrestling was, I thought I was going to be doing body slams and fun things like that. So I didn't like wrestling at first. But then to pivot back to how did I originally get into wrestling? Well, I went out for football at my middle school when I was in 7th grade. And when football was over, I needed a sport to go into, and I didn't play basketball, okay? And I needed an activity, I needed a sport. I had a bunch of my friends that were in 8th grade, and they were from my neighborhood, and they said wrestling's really cool. And at my school, wrestling was very popular. We had a really big culture of wrestling, and kind of like similar to like a Buchanan or a Clovis High. So we had 100 kids go out for the wrestling team in middle school. So the wrestling room was totally packed. And I went out for wrestling in 7th grade, and that's kind of where I met my first real mentor in my life. Man, that was really helped affect my life. It was my first wrestling coach when I was in 7th grade. His name was Jim Holmgren, and he saw something in me as a 7th grader. He just saw something. He thought this is maybe a kid out of all the 100 kids that were in the room. He pointed me out, and he wanted to see, he's the first one that told me, hey, you are pretty good at this, but you've got to do extra. You've got to do off-season wrestling. So once wrestling season was over in 7th grade, he's like, no, now we have to do extra wrestling in the summer. We have to continue to wrestle. And he would go and pick me up after school and take me to the wrestling club at the high school. And then he would also pick me up at 6 a.m. in the morning or 5:30 a.m. in the morning so that we can go to the off-season wrestling tournaments and make weight and wrestle at different tournaments in the off-season. So,
well, I noticed you didn't mention your father, and not that you don't have to explain anything, but was there a father figure in your?
I didn't. I never had a. Well, okay, so my biological father, they divorced when I was quite young. Maybe 2 to 3 years old, and then I never had any real memory of my father, my biological father, other than when I was about 5 years old. My mother was dating my eventual stepfather, and my biological father came to the house, the apartment, and I remember going to the door, and I didn't have my shirt on, and I think it was kind of cold outside or whatever, and he knocked on the door, and he had flowers in his hand.
Oh my goodness!
I opened the door, and my eventual stepfather at the time, I don't believe they weren't married yet, said, "Hey Jason, get away from the door. It's cold outside." And then my biological father said, "Hey, he's not your father. Don't listen to him." And they ended up getting into a fight. And my mother, I just remember my mother grabbing me and taking me into the bathroom, and just hearing the fight going on out there. And I remember just crying as maybe 4 or 5 years old, not knowing what's going on, being scared. That was my only memory of my biological father. And ever since then, I have no other memory of him. I tried to look him up online, and I've done Ancestry.com and different things to try to see if he's dead or alive or whatever. But I'm not quite sure. I haven't found anything yet. But I know of a couple places he lived in the city. In fact, when I was living in New York City, he was about 10 blocks above me, living in a homeless shelter.
Oh.
I was living on East 4th Street before I moved out here. I was living in the East Village in New York, Manhattan, and turns out when I researched it on Google and saw some of the places he lived, he was actually living in a homeless shelter on 14th Street. So he was 10 blocks away from me. I had no idea.
All those years.
All those years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
then I had a stepfather, and we just never really got along for whatever reason. He never really accepted me. Yeah, that was that.
did you have other siblings eventually?
Yeah, I have 3 brothers.
Okay.
Which I'm the oldest of 4 boys.
Okay.
And so my mother remarried and eventually had 3 other sons, and I have 3 younger brothers.
They're half brothers.
Half brothers, but we're whole brothers because we We always lived in the house together. And
Good.
We don't look at each other as half brothers. They're my
So you have good relationships with them.
yeah. I have a good relationship with them. Yeah, I was always more of like a, kind of a surrogate father figure for them, being that there was a big age gap. Because when my my brother Steven, he's 6.5 years younger than me. So I was 6.5, going on 7 years old. He's born in December, and I'm born in June. So about 7 year gap between us.
Yeah.
So just growing up, it was like more like an older brother, kind of like a mentor type relationship, as opposed to being right around a year or two apart, where we can like play together and really connect together. So I've always kind of been a big brother to them.
So your first 10, 12 years of life, there really wasn't a father or a mentor until what, the 6th or 7th grade?
Yeah, then the 7th grade is when I got that first mentor.
What was his name again?
His name was Jim Holmgren.
Okay. Do you still keep in touch with him?
He passed away in during COVID.
Oh.
Yeah, he ended up passing away during COVID, and I actually flew out there with my family. We did they did a big, like kind of a celebration of life, and they asked me to come out there and actually speak on his behalf, and I went out there with my family and everything.
Did you keep in touch with him?
Here and there, yeah. Here and there,
So
we would always
tell
keep
us
in
a little
touch.
bit about what that mentorship, how did that shape you? What did that do for you?
What did it do? I mean, it was someone that believed in me. Someone that believed in me. Started putting, because I really, one of the things I believe is you have to have, if you have people that pave the way and show a road or a trail to something, it makes it a little bit easier for the younger generation, because it's possible. It becomes something that's possible. And when you're a kid that maybe didn't have a father or an older brother that could pave the way, you don't know what's possible.
Yeah.
I would see, baseball players or whatever it is. You would see people that were successful, but you don't know how do you do it.
Yeah.
How do you do it? How do you become successful? One of the things I always had in my heart from a very young age was a desire to work hard and to try to do the right thing, and never quit in anything I ever did.
Yeah.
I just had that internally. I never quit. If something didn't go the right way or something, I would always finish the task through.
Yeah.
For example, when I went out for the baseball team, and one of the things I like about wrestling as opposed to team sports is there really isn't much politics involved. When you play baseball, especially like travel baseball, for whatever reason, the coach's son is the starting pitcher every time. And then when you go out for the football team, for whatever reason, the coach's son is the starting quarterback. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's just, gosh, isn't that weird? And you see so much of that in sports. And I was a good football player. I was a good baseball player. And then when I got in the 7th grade, all of a sudden, when I was in 7th grade, I was a great baseball player. I played my whole life. I was sitting on the bench. Never got to play. And the rule was, we just play 8th graders. I didn't understand that. Similar type of things in football. So I hated that politics. But even though, maybe it wasn't going my direction, I always saw it through. So my 8th grade year, I stuck it through. I finished out the season. Then I just decided after that, I wasn't going to go out for the baseball team anymore. But in wrestling, I felt like I really controlled my own destiny.
Yeah.
If I was the best, it was apparent on the mat. There's very little ways for anyone to take that away from you.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter who your dad is, if he's friends with the coach, or, there's no popularity contest. If I'm on the mat and I'm winning and it's apparent that I'm the best, as long as I'm a good teammate, I'm a good citizen, making the right decisions off the mat, there's no way they're going to take that away from me.
Well, that is very interesting. Good insight. Going back to, and then I want to talk about next is your move to the Fresno, what that was about, what you were doing in New York before you did. But back to the fatherhood and everything, I truly believe, and I was raised that fathers bring their sons to manhood. So it took you a while before you had that mentor.
Yes.
I can't imagine if you never had a mentor or you didn't move out of Queens, where would your life?
Who knows?
Who knows? But
Well, that's why one of the things I will tell people is I don't have any regrets. You know, and not everything has gone my way. I've lost plenty of wrestling matches that I feel like I should have won, and I didn't reach all of my goals that I set out for in the sport, and I don't think anyone does totally. But I wouldn't be where I am today if, with every step of the way, if anything gets changed, I may not be sitting here right now.
Yeah.
So there's no reason in your heart to have regrets or think that, you know, to think about it or dwell on it. It's not productive at all, because I have an amazing family right now, an amazing wife, and you know we could talk about later. And
so it sounds like all these things that happened to you in life were just the path to where you are today. Steps,
exactly.
you know, and you know, probably there were some victories and defeats in your life, but it all shaped you to who you are.
Yeah, I mean, I think about if I would have had that father, you know, and you can have a father who's destructive and not good, you know. So it's not like you just have to have any father. You have to have a good father. You have to have a positive role model. Somebody who knows how to be a father. Someone who knows how to love.
Was there ever a point where you were younger that you noticed other boys had fathers, you didn't? Did you feel left out?
No, you know what? Growing up, I didn't feel like that, because what I used to, and I didn't think it affected me. And then when I got to college later on, I think I started realizing maybe it did affect me a little bit. But you know, I didn't really dwell on that because I was just tunnel vision on trying to reach my goals. And if anything, I think I had this fantasy in my mind, you know, as a little kid, that I'm going to show him. And even like my stepfather really didn't accept me. And what was sad was I was a great athlete. I was the best one of the best I was voted the champion of champions in New York State my senior year in wrestling at the state tournament. You know, I was a state champion. I was the high school All-American. I was on, you know, the U.S. Freestyle wrestling team for 16 and under, and represented the United States at the World Championships in Budapest, Hungary. So I had a lot of things that a man, even though maybe he wasn't my biological father, you know, he could have been like, whatever, this is my boy, I'm raising him, I'm paying the bills, you know, I'm putting a roof over his head, so I'm going to be there. You know, he could have taken claim, but for whatever reason, you know, he wasn't able to do that mentally.
Well, I like what you said, no regrets, you know, and I could appreciate that. So let's talk about your move. What were you doing in New York before you made the change to come to Fresno, and why Fresno? Like, do you talk a little bit about that? So what were you doing before you moved to Fresno, California?
So I was working as a stockbroker. I ended up getting my degree at the University of Nebraska. That's where I went to college. Got a scholarship and wrestled at the University of Nebraska. For a couple of years, I went out to Colorado Springs and trained at the Olympic Training Center in the late 90s in an effort to make the Olympic team in freestyle wrestling. And then, you know, after a couple of years, I had a couple credits that I had to finish up in order to get my degree at Nebraska. And one of my mother's dreams was to see me get the degree, because we didn't have anybody in our family that had gotten a 4-year bachelor's degree at the time. Nobody in our immediate family, that is, had gotten a college degree. So, and I promised my mother that I was going to get that degree. I wasn't just going to go and let this opportunity and not get a degree, because that was the reason why I was out of college, was to get my college degree. So I went back and finished up my education, graduated in December, moved back to New York, and then I was like, okay, what am I going to do now? So I wanted to go into sales. I thought I had the gift of gab, pretty good at talking. So I met a guy in the gym one time. I was working out, and I was lifting in the gym, and he came up to me, and he goes, Jason Kraft, oh my God, what are you doing? Because in my town, I was, at that time, not anymore, but I was a little bit of a big deal. A lot of people knew me from athletics. And I was back home in New York, and they were like, what are you doing, man? What are you up to? And I'm like, I'm not sure really. And he was working as a stockbroker.
About how young were you then?
I was, yeah, so that was going to be 2000. Well, 1999, that was 2000, so I'm going to be 2074, 26 years old there.
Okay.
Right, so I'm 26 years old, right around 26. And because I had trained for a couple of years after college in wrestling, then I eventually came back. So I was around 25, 26 years old. This was during the .com internet bubble. Everything was going crazy in the stock market, and he was like, hey man, he's like, I work at a firm, I own a firm, I got my Ferraris parked out front, you got to come work for me as a stockbroker.
Oh wow.
And if you picture, this is that boiler room era of the like the Wolf of Wall Street. So that's where I went and worked for a Wolf of Wall Street type firm to start. They hired me as a cold caller, and I had to get all my licenses and get my Series 7 and everything, and I didn't know what I was getting into. But I ended up getting my license, and then right when I got my license, I kind of left that place and moved to New York City and got an office at the World Trade Center in the South Tower.
Wow, so you worked in the Trade Center?
Yes. So I was working in the World Trade Center.
What story?
The 40th floor, 42nd floor of the South Tower, right? So I got a job and I'm working in the World Trade Center as a stockbroker. And what a stockbroker is back in that day is, and people would meet, oh, you must be really good with numbers. No. I was looking at a wall with a stack of lead cards. And my job, I was making $250 a week, and I was living on my grandmother. So my grandmother was living in Flushing, Queens. So I was living on a cot in my grandmother's living room. Pull out to a cot, and I was making $250 a week as a cold caller. So I had a senior broker who hired me, who was going to teach me the ropes. So the ropes is not how to pick stocks, not how to trade, not, finance. It's smile and dial. Here's a pack of lead cards. Get on the phone and gather leads.
So I'm going to stop you with that because as a realtor, we are always lead generating, right?
Yes.
So how many calls did you, cold calls, right?
I would get there at 6:30 in the morning. And I remember my first day, one of my first days, you get to the office and, I had my fresh suit, my brand new suit. I'm so excited. And I'm going to the World Trade Center. And,
wow.
This is the epic, the Twin Towers, and this is the epicenter of capitalism in the world. And I go in there, and I go up there, and I get in there, and there's a few different senior brokers, and they won't talk to me because I'm just a grunt. Imagine being in, like, the military. And my broker, he played lacrosse at Johns Hopkins, so he loved me because I was a wrestler, D1 wrestler. So he was a D1 lacrosse player, and when somehow he hired me, and he was like, I love this guy. This guy's an athlete. He's going to be competitive. He's going to work hard. He's going to want to be successful. So he thought it was a great hire for him. And there were other brokers in there. And when I first started, I remember the NASDAQ was at 5,000. This was the top of the bubble. It was March of 2000. And so my first job as a associate broker, cold caller, was to go down and get coffees. So first thing was, Jason, we're going to need you to go downstairs. And then I was getting like 10 coffees from all the senior brokers. So I go downstairs and I'm everyone thinks it's glory, this and that. It's $250 a week. Go down there and get coffee, kid. So I walk down there and I go across the street and I was in a bodega and I remember the girl was ordering all these coffees and she sees me and she's smiling and laughing. She goes, cold caller, huh? First day? I go, yeah, it's your first day. So I'm walking and I'm balancing 15 coffees in my hand and I go up. And that was my first day as a broker.
And you had to go back up to the 40th floor with those coffees.
Yeah, of course.
Gee,
That's but that's how it is though.
Yeah.
If you become a broker, you're not closing deals. A real estate broker. you're not closing deals right away.
No.
You've got to be a grunt. You have got to learn the business. You know, and
Start
it's
at
not
start
boring.
at the beginning in the
Yes.
what do you call it in the
Shoveling,
yeah
yeah. So, and I expected that.
in
So
the
it-
pits.
Yeah, so it didn't bother me. I wasn't entitled where I felt that I was entitled to anything more. You know, I expected that. That's fine. I
Yeah.
didn't think I was. You know, I had I remember asking Chris was his name, my senior broker. I turned around for a second. Chris, am I going to get a computer? You don't need a computer, buddy. You know, because it was just a brick wall I was staring against, and I was just at a stacked leads card. That's all you needed, and that was it.
Do you remember what you started off your pay to do that?
Yeah, it was $250 a week.
Oh, $250 a week.
Yeah,
You sent that.
$250 a week.
$1,000 a month.
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah, $250
Approximate,
a week.
yeah. Wow.
And that was that. And I started doing that. And the deal was I had to open up 40 new members. So eventually, you don't know how to do anything. You don't know sales. You don't know anything. So you're basically training how to do sales over the phone, right? And it starts with trying to generate leads, trying to qualify people on the lead cards. And what we did, we had mortgage leads. So we were calling the most expensive areas in the country.
Yeah.
So I'd be calling Atherton, California. I'd be calling Menlo. I'd be calling, the whole Silicon Valley and
Wow.
trying to qualify them, trying to see if they'd be interested for our information, if we could have a senior broker give you a call back with a recommendation.
Yeah.
And then my senior broker would, and then you would write on the lead card how much money they have in the market, whether they're qualified, whether they're an accredited investor, and then he would call them back with his ideas.
And how long did you do that for?
Well, I had to get to like 40. I got to 40 accounts, and I opened up my 40 accounts. And then what Chris wanted to do is, what they tried to do is get me to go into a partnership with him. And he wanted me to be an account opener, which, you go from cold calling and qualifying to pitching stock and trying to open them up as a customer. So once you can open up 40, you've kind of rites of passage. You've shown that you can open an account. But then obviously after you open the account, you have to manage the money, and know how to obviously trade and make them money, and give them the proper recommendations and everything that goes into managing people's finances. And I wanted to do that, and he wanted me to be a partner. And what I did was I just left and I moved across the street. Excuse me. And I moved across the street into another building directly across the street from the World Trade Center, which happened to be kind of lucky because about 10 months later, 9/11 happened.
Wow.
When everything got hit and the towers came down and everything. So I was a little bit fortunate there. I ended up being able to skate across the street. And,
Can you imagine?
Get away from that stuff.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so then you made a decision to come to Fresno. What was that all about?
So what happened was, back in the 90s, I met the Zinkin brothers, prominent real estate development family here in town. A lot of people pretty much know the Zinkin family. And I got to be buddies with the brothers of Mr. Zinkin.
How did you meet them?
Well, they wrestled at Fresno State.
Okay.
And I was wrestling at the University of Nebraska.
Okay.
And we we met each other at a couple of tournaments, got to be friends. And we would see each other. Nebraska would host what was called the National Duels, where we would host the best teams in the country to come in and compete against each other. And I met Fresno State used to come and compete in that. And I also would go out to the Las Vegas tournament, and I ran into those guys there. And through the years, we became friends. So in the early 2000s, we always kept in contact, and we would get together from time to time. One of the brothers, Dwayne, he was thinking of going into sports management for UFC fighters. And this was when I believe Dana White first started getting involved. They bought the UFC, because the UFC in the early days was nothing like it was today. It was kind of like a circus where they would pit the black belt in karate versus the wrestler to see who would win between these styles. Or they would put the Taekwondo black belt world champion versus the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion. And it was kind of like, well, let's see which style would win. And that's how they used to do it in the beginning. So it was more of like a kind of like a circus, so to speak, where it was like, okay, people are kind of curious tuning in. And then when Dana White bought it, it turned into actually a legitimate sport where people were becoming mixed martial artists, where they were learning all the different aspects of fighting, not just focusing in one in particular area. Like you put a boxer out there that's never wrestled or never done Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and they face a grappler with no wrestling or ground experience, they're going to get just totally killed. And that was what was happening in the beginning, was the wrestlers and the Jiu-Jitsu practitioners would quickly go in there and take down the fighters that didn't have any type of ground fighting.
Wow.
And at that time, Dwayne was thinking about getting into management because a lot of wrestlers were thinking of it as this is an avenue after wrestling is over, because wrestlers historically didn't make a lot of money. We were amateur wrestlers. There wasn't a lot of money generation in our sport. The best wrestlers in the world would get paid small salaries from USA Wrestling, and it was very difficult for them, a lot of them, to support their families. So a lot of them, like Dan Henderson, Randy Couture, Chuck Liddell, were all Division I wrestlers. Tito Ortiz, they ended up transitioning into mixed martial arts and going into the UFC and making lots of money. So Dwayne, being a wrestler, but also having a family that's business savvy, that could understand contract negotiations and things like that, he had an idea along with Nick and Harold of the brothers to, hey, this could be something that we can do. And I remember early conversations with them. The premise was they wanted to go protect the wrestlers, because they knew that the wrestlers would go into this and have absolutely no business, no contract. I had no idea. Many of them are going to be poor, so they're going to be desperate to take a bad deal. So Dwayne was like, number one, being an All-American wrestler himself, they knew, who the best wrestlers were, and he had a good idea of who could be a good fighter and what wrestlers were not really going to be cut for fighting, that weren't going to be, because it's not always the best wrestlers that are going to be able to transition into mixed martial arts and be successful. It takes a certain breed of athlete, the transition, and a certain style of wrestling that's going to be successful in MMA. So, he thought he would have a good opportunity for talent. He had a lot of contacts in the wrestling world. So a lot of his friends that were coaches at different universities would say, hey, this guy right here wants to be a fighter and he's tough. I think he could work out. So he was going into that. And through my relationship with them over the years, eventually back in 2008, we had a big housing crunch and the economy had collapsed. I had an opportunity to move out and transition and pivot and make a life change, and had an opportunity to move out to Fresno and open up an MMA gym with Josh Koscheck, who was one of their clients, who's one of the best UFC fighters in the world at the time.
Who encouraged you to do that at that time? What made you come out of working as a stockbroker to opening up a gym? I know you had wrestling behind you. That's understandable, but
Harold Zinkin, who was the older brother, me and Harold had a really good relationship. We were friends. And Harold at the time was like, hey man, you should come move out to Fresno. Come check it out. And I went out there and checked it out a little bit. And he's like, man, the economy's really bad right now, but you should definitely make a change. The city life, it's a rat race. You're kind of spinning your wheels. You move out here to Fresno. This is a family-oriented place. You'll be able to meet somebody one day and have a family. He's like, in New York, it's so expensive. You're just kind of running around on the hamster wheel and wasting, your time.
So when you got to Fresno,
he was the one who actually kind of set it up a little bit, and along with Dwayne and those guys, they actually talked to Josh and recommended me, because Josh wanted to open up an AKA, because at the time Josh was training in San Jose, California, at the original AKA San Jose, which is a famous a gym where many world champion and UFC fighters came out of there. And Josh was traveling from Fresno back and forth a lot, and it was kind of killing him. And he wanted to have his own gym where he could train, so he didn't have to do as much traveling to prep for his fights. So he wanted to open up his own gym. He was at a point in his career where he had the financial ability to do that, but he needed somebody who could run the gym and do the day-to-day operations, and that's where the Zinkins recommended me.
Yeah. So when you got to Fresno and you saw it visited, what did you think of the city? What was your first impressions? Did you fall in love with Fresno, or did you think, oh my goodness, or, do you remember? That was in 2008.
It was such a change. I was a city guy at the time. I hadn't owned a car for like 10 years. I hadn't owned a car. I was a city guy living in the East Village. And, when you're in the city, you're kind of living I guess you would call it a narcissistic or selfish lifestyle, so to speak. You're just out having fun. You're not thinking of settling down, having a family. You're kind of living in the moment, and it's almost like a fun place. It's like a playground for kids, for adults. Mm-hmm. It's like, and I have a lot of friends that, they're my age now, and they never got married. They ended up never settling down just because. And if you'll see that in the bigger cities, there's a lot of, I have a few ex-girlfriends. Almost all of them never settled down and had families.
I did not know that.
They're childless. And a bunch of my male friends that I work with, colleagues and buddies that I still keep in contact with, they ended up not settling down and getting families just because it's, in a sense, it's not conducive. It's really expensive, and, you're just kind of living in the moment, so to speak, in a big city like New York.
So then you got to Fresno, and did you make several trips before you made that decision, or was it an easy decision?
I took a trip out there at first before I even had the opportunity, just to kind of hang out with Harold. And at the time, his son was wrestling, so we went to a couple of his tournaments. I went to the state tournament, I think it was. And then after that, the idea came. They had the idea, hey, Kraft would be a good partner for you, Josh, to try to run the day-to-day operations.
Wow.
So I moved out in June of 2009, okay. and then in August, by August 1st, we had opened up AK Fresno.
And where was that located?
The Bullard and Marks location.
That was Bullard and Marks, okay. Yeah. And so you started it with 0 clients, right? You had to build up the business, right?
I was really lucky. I never, where I'm at now, it would have never been possible without Josh. Mm-hmm. I'm not some egomaniac thinks, I did all this and this and that. Josh was a star. He was a celebrity at the time. He was a big deal. I had never really seen this, but when I came out and I was hanging out with Josh, everywhere we would go, people would stop for pictures and autographs. He was like a celebrity. Because at the time the UFC was really taking off, and he had a look that everybody would recognize. And whether we were in Fresno or wherever we would go, people would recognize Josh, and they'd want to shake his hand. They want to take a picture. So we had no problem getting our first 100 members. We had 100 members that signed up before we even opened the doors, because people had heard on Facebook, because at the time there was no Instagram or anything, but there was Facebook, and Josh put it out there that he was opening up his own MMA gym in town. So we had 100 people that came and wanted to sign up. So it was like shooting fish in a barrel for me. I had a good sales background. I was kind of a shark who was on the phone, who knew how to close, working on Wall Street. So I had that sales. I understood the psychology of a sale. I had those skills that I developed, which would really help me in developing. But it was a different type of sale. But getting the first 100 members and getting really the 200, 300 members in the first year was not hard. The difficulty came after that first year.
And that was because of?
So when we first opened a business, in town, there's like a honeymoon effect. You know, I remember Krispy Kreme donuts. People remember that well in town. I wasn't even here, but I remember reading how it was unbelievable. And and especially like in Fresno, when there's a new thing and there's something new, people will go and go and go, and it's like, wow, holy cow. And then after a couple of years, they'll drop you and they'll move on to the next thing. So what I learned was the first year, you know, everyone that was coming were really fans of Josh. You know, they were fans of Josh. And a lot of them realized very quickly, like, they were UFC fans, but they didn't like this fighting stuff. They didn't like this hard work stuff. They didn't like this training. Yeah. So many of them after the first year were like canceling their memberships. So I was like, okay. So then that's when the real process started of constantly trying to reflect on the business, you know, make the business, put the best product out there, understand and kind of learn, you know, what to do. And that was the evolution. We've been open 16 years.
You've been open 16 years now?
16 years.
Wow.
Yeah, 16 years, August 1st.
Okay.
And kind of do trial and error. You know, sometimes I would we've offered certain classes and they didn't do well, and then we take them back. You know,
if you had to guess,
trial and error.
How many memberships do you have today with the two locations?
You know, I'm not quite sure. You know, I would say maybe about 500 members.
Okay.
Between the two, about 500 members.
Yeah, and is that considered, when you say members, is that families? Because I know you have a lot of families.
Yeah, I'm talking about individual members. So you can have a family of 3. I would count that as 3 members.
Okay.
Family of 4 members.
Yeah. What are some of the classes that you guys are providing? Because I know when I go in there, there's a bunch of little kids at times, and it's amazing.
So one of the things that I think has contributed to our longevity and success is being able to, you know, not limit yourself and kind of corner yourself or pigeonhole yourself into one niche.
Yeah.
You
Real
know,
quick,
so
for our viewers, I want to make sure they understand that the name you go under today is Dethrone Martial.
I said AK Fresno.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I meant to.
So we started as AK Fresno, my bad. And we eventually, after a couple of years, we ended up changing our name to Dethrone Mixed Martial Arts. So Dethrone Royalty was a clothing brand, or still is a clothing brand up in the Bay Area that they make MMA clothing. They had represented Josh, Cain Velasquez, Josh Thompson, Conor McGregor. They had, not represented, but they made shirts and they had them as, you know, ambassadors of their brand for years. And Josh was one of their brand ambassadors. And so when Josh wanted to change the name, he wanted to break away from AK Fresno for personal reasons. So we didn't know what exactly to do. Okay, what are we going to do? And the owner of Dethrone at the time, his name was Nick, he had recommended, well, why don't we make it Dethrone?
Yeah.
So since that was affiliation to Josh, and so we were like, yeah, that's a great idea, because it was a known brand. It was already a branded name in MMA fighting. Yeah. It was known, you know, around the world. So it was kind of like a tap out or something like that, you know. So we ended up rebranding into Dethrone Mixed Martial Arts.
Okay, very good. And you said you had about 500 members approximately right now. So a couple things that come to my mind. First of all, how many different classes are you guys teaching? Different, you know?
We teach different disciplines. So for the adults, we teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. All right, and that's really a backbone core class. And the reason for that is you can do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu when you're 5 years old. You could do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu when you're 70 years old. You know, it's something you can do almost your whole life. Yeah. You know, it's not as I guess wearing and brutal on the body as, like, say, a wrestling or something like that. So we Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, we offer kids, we offer adult classes. Now we have what's called gi, the gi class. Now a gi is like a judo robe. If you think about the sport of judo, it's a kimono with the robe, and you wear a belt.
Yes.
And it's a martial art, so we do belt belt promotions, and you start off as a white belt, which is the beginner, and you work your way up. When you're a child, you go from white belt to gray belt to yellow belt to orange belt, and then the green belt. And then as a adult, you'll go from white, sometimes green, to blue, to purple, brown, black eventually, and become a black belt. When you're a black belt, you're considered a master, so to speak, an expert in the sport. So you have gi, and then you have no gi. And no gi is very similar to the sport of wrestling, where you're no longer wearing the gi. So it's no gi. Otherwise, sometimes it's called submission grappling. So now you're wrestling. So on your feet, you're doing wrestling techniques, takedowns, and when you get on the ground, instead of trying to pin the opponent, what you're looking to do is you're trying to submit them with a submission technique, which can be anything from a chokehold to an arm bar, something of that nature. So we have black belt instructors, male and female, between our two locations, and they teach the adult and kids classes at both locations.
Yeah. Is Nick Bustamante still with you guys?
Nick Bustamante, yes, is still with us.
Yeah,
black belt. Nick is great.
You have a lot of great coaches, but he's
so
one
Nick
that
is very well rounded.
Yeah.
Nick started off in the beginning as a member at our gym, and just super hard worker, workhorse in the gym, starting out as a member. He had a background in judo and wrestling when he was a kid. So he had a little bit of a foundation, and he wanted to be a pro MMA fighter, and he worked extremely hard and eventually progressed into being a pro mixed martial arts fighter. He fought in Bellator, Strikeforce, fought in many cards, and he eventually became an instructor at the gym.
Yeah. Okay, and then you also had Mar Cardio. That's where I was introduced to your place and I started doing the cardio there.
So the Mar Cardio. So Mar was a clothing brand of Josh.
Oh.
So Josh Koscheck, Josh had a clothing brand he started.
I still wear the T-shirt.
Called Mar.
Yeah.
So then what happened was there was a specific workout that the fighters did at AKA in San Jose to prep and get themselves in elite shape, elite cardio for their fights. So if you think about a fight in the UFC, right? You have 5-minute rounds, and you'll have 3 5-minute rounds. Now, if you have a title fight and you're fighting for a world championship, you're going to fight 5-minute rounds.
Wow.
That's a 25-minute fight.
Yeah.
I mean, as opposed to, let's say, a wrestling match or a jiu-jitsu match that's going to be 6 to 7 minutes. Black belt level in jiu-jitsu would be a 10-minute match, but so you have to be in incredible shape.
Yeah.
As an athlete in the UFC and at that level. So Josh would up at San Jose, they had an Airdyne bike, and they had a little room that they would go into for this cardio, and they would get on the Airdyne bike and they would do a minute on the bike, and then they would jump off and they would do different things, like they would jump on a bag and they would do ground and pound on a bag, or maybe they would hit a speed bag, or maybe they would do kicks, or maybe their coach would hold mitts for them, and then they would jump back on the bike. So they were going on the bike, on an exercise, on the bike, on an exercise. Well, then what happened was we created a workout for our members based off of that template.
Right.
So the premise was on the bike for a minute, and we purchased air bikes, and on the bike, and then you're going to jump off and you're going to do an exercise. You're going to get back on the bike, back on an exercise, which is a HIIT, high intensity interval training. So a HIIT workout, which was kind of, originally thought of from that original fighter workout up in San Jose is where it actually came from.
Yeah. So I'm going to piggyback a little bit on that story of those air bikes. And I told you the story you may not remember, but one of our good friends, mutual good friends, came up to me one time, Jared Martin, and gave me a little card. He says, Greg, you ought to go check out this gym. Here's a week's pass. So I went to Dethrone and I started working out there, and then I joined as a member. The interesting thing, those assault bikes saved my life. And so just quick telling the viewers, it was 2018. I was 58 years old, and I remember it was a Wednesday. It was on the January 21st, I believe, and I was on the bike, and about the third round, I could feel some pressure here. And I thought, well, what is that? And I know growing up that couldn't be my heart, because when I was in grammar school and we had to do the pledges of allegiance, I put your hand over your heart, right? So this is where they told you to put it. And so about the fifth time I got on the bike, it would subside. And it happened about 2-3 times. It just kept happening. About the third time on the bike for a minute, I'd feel that pressure. About the fifth time, it would go away. So what I did, I thought something's not right. So I went to my general practitioner and I started telling him about it. We started doing some tests. Next thing I know, that I am going to a cardiologist, Dr. Kruger, here in Fresno. And then, long story short, he did an angiogram and found out that I had 90 to 95% blockage in my main vein. He had told me at the time that if I had a heart attack, I would have died. He says, typically that does not give you any warning. And he says, so for that assault bike is the only time I felt that pressure, the only time, that intenseness. And so we went in and I got a stint, and I've been great ever since. But because of your business, because of those assault bikes, it saved my life.
And I remember that actually, talking to you about that. And I remember you telling me too how you would do your blood work and your doctor and your annuals would say, "Man, what are you doing? What do you remember you were telling me?"
Yeah, you're a young man.
You couldn't believe what's going on here.
Yeah.
And you were, it was from that workout.
Yeah. So, I just wanted to kind of share it because we're talking about the cardio. So getting back to your business, and everything that's shaping in your life from the beginning stages of your life. You had mentorships, your business that you were, in New York to Fresno. How did that all shape your life to who you are today?
Well, I think what shaped was
when it comes to running your business for one, then your family, your children.
Well, as far as running my business and as far as everyday life, is understanding that nothing's ever going to be perfect. It's normal to have some chaos in your life here and there. And nobody, I never look at anyone else and covet them. If they have more money or this and that, or they look like they have a great life. And no, I don't, all I do is ever wish everyone success. I wish everyone in town that are, opening up new MMA gyms or opening up jiu-jitsu gyms or this and that, I hope they have tremendous success.
Yeah.
Because all those small businesses represent dreams that they have. Like, I have a dream, and all those businesses, everything that when they take a risk and they go out there and they put their, not their life, but they put their, they take the courage to open up a business. They put capital down. They put sweat equity. They, their family, they're risking something. And I look at that. I hope they're incredibly successful because there's plenty of room for everybody to be successful in town. But when I look at, wrestling, and I look at my life, and I look at, you're going to have adversity. You're going to have tough things that happen to you. And, the type of person you are, the character is going to be, how do you respond to those things that happen? Mm-hmm. Do you quit? Do you make excuses? Do you look to point the finger at somebody else? Or do you take accountability and you try to figure out a way? Obviously, when you have a business, not everything is in your control. You try to do the best job you can, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're doing something wrong if maybe you're not 100% successful. It takes time to build something that's good. So you have to constantly self-reflect on yourself. I had to do that in wrestling to try to get better. You have to be honest with yourself. Where are you struggling? On the mat. Are you struggling? Are people getting to your legs and taking you down? Is your defense not where it needs to be? Do you got to get better on bottom? Do you got to get better on top? This, I'm talking about wrestling. Right. You can apply that towards business. Is the customer service where it needs to be? Is it the proper classes? Is it the proper instructors? You have to take self-inventory all the time, and that's a good thing about being a business owner is you have control of that.
Yeah.
You have control. So it's similar to athletics where you have control. You're going to go as far as, your work ethic goes, because there's plenty of people that become champions in national champions, world champions, All-Americans, state champions that maybe didn't have all the talent in the world. And there's lots of people with all the talent in the world that end up, you remember as, man, remember that kid, he could have been great. But he never did anything because he had all the talent, but he didn't have the grind, he didn't have the work ethic, he didn't have the perseverance, he didn't have that internal fortitude to push forward during tough conditions.
Yeah, so you, as a wrestler, you had a lot of wins, and you had a few defeats, I'm assuming.
Yes.
And the same thing in your business, you have a lot of wins, and there's some defeats. So what is it about Jason that when those defeats come, how do you handle that? How do you rise above that? How do you internalize, okay, this didn't work? And maybe it's something that maybe made a big impact too, So how do you handle that,
You got to learn from it. So just an example of one of the things I learned throughout the years, and I look back at myself, and I don't know if you ever do this, but I do this all the time, and maybe I'm the only one, but I drive around my car, you're driving, and in your brain, you're self-reflecting on your life sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
And you're thinking about how stupid you were as a kid.
Yeah.
And when I say kid, 20s, 30s,
Yeah.
even like the early 40s or whatever, like, gosh, that was stupid. Gosh,
Yeah.
that was dumb. Man, that could have turned out really bad. That was a bad decision, or, so I look back at myself and, I didn't know what I was doing, when I came out here. I had no experience in managing people. I had no experience in face-to-face customer service. I was a stockbroker working on Wall Street, a Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
I was doing. And, I had personality. I had communication skills. And I had some skills that I developed in the finance world, but, I was in a completely different environment, and I had to learn. And I was a little bit cocky when I came out here. I really thought I was, something special. And I learned, and we struggled as a business for a while. We struggled as a business, because like I said, you had that original surge, that honeymoon period. And then after that, you start shedding members after the first year because everyone would come in and they'd sign their contract and they were so excited and they were huge fans of Josh and this and that, and they would come in and eventually, after a month or two, Josh is there sometimes he's not, a lot of times he's, maybe traveling or something like that. He's not there and they're like, oh man, this is tough.
Yeah.
And they end up quitting. After that first year, you start shedding members. So now, as a gym, there's a lot of churn in this business. Whatever gym you have, whether it's you can name yoga studio or GB3 or any type of like business like that, you're gonna have a lot of churn. Yeah. So you're gonna have people that, for whatever reason, they quit. And what I also learned is it doesn't necessarily mean we did anything wrong.
No.
People quit because of whatever. They personally don't want to do it anymore. It wasn't what they thought. Or, maybe they lost their job. Maybe finances got
life changes.
Life changes.
Life changes, yeah.
So I had to learn that, people are gonna quit. And, so it's very important to continue to add new business.
Yeah.
Any business, doesn't matter what it is, you have to
real estate business.
New business.
Yeah.
You have to add new business. That's the lifeblood.
Yeah.
But in my business, you're fighting people that will become delinquent because of whatever reason. They're maybe they're going through financial hardship, or they just don't want to come anymore. So you're fighting delinquencies. You're fighting people that just don't want to do it anymore for whatever reason, life reasons.
Yeah. Doesn't necessarily mean it was you,
Yes.
like you said. I love
or an instructor.
Yeah.
So you can't take it to heart.
Yeah.
Like in the beginning, like, oh man, And one of the things I did that was wrong, and that I look back on and I learned, is I started lowering my prices in the beginning. And I thought it was price. And I would lower my prices,
Yeah.
And You would get a lot of members. You would lower your price, but then all of a sudden now someone who paid a higher price because the members talk, and they say, "Oh, what are you paying here?"
Yep.
I'm paying. You're paying that? Why did you? I've been here 8 months. I've been a loyal member, and this guy's paying X amount less. And it would come back to bite you. It would kind of hurt your internal culture with the members, and it would commoditize and belittle your price. And we offer so much, and I feel like we do such a great job, and we offer really, we stand alone, I believe, in town as offering. We really aren't too many other MMA gyms. I can't think of any really. There are a lot of jiu-jitsu schools. There are a lot of wrestling places. There are a bunch of boxing places, but nobody really, I think, is offering what we offer, in town. So, over time I got to realize, hey, it's not the price, man.
Yeah.
It's not the price. In fact, members come in and people come in, parents, adults, they don't know. They're going to know what the price is, what you tell them that it is.
Yes, yeah.
And then they'll make a decision whether or not it makes sense for them.
Yeah, I feel like price and quality.
Yeah.
My dad, one time I had to paint the outside of our house recently, and I had a bid of $8,000 and a bid of $6,000. And my dad says, pay the higher. He says, you're going to get a better quality paint. Mm-hmm. And I remember him coming over after it was all done. He says, man, who painted this house? We went with the higher price.
Yeah.
So we have a few minutes left. Let's talk a little bit about your family. So tell us about your wife, how many children you have, and how is your life, how does that involve with your family now?
Well, everything changed, as you would know. Anyone who started a family, they all would say, man, my life changed. And it's such a, and...
So you were single when you got to
Yes,
Fresno?
and, single. I mean, had girlfriends, but never started a family. And it was almost like looking like, hey, maybe this wasn't in the cards for me. Because, you have to find the right one.
How old were you when you got married?
Well, let's see, because 2021 is when we got married. So that's 4 years ago, December. So 3.5 years ago, we got married in December of 21.
Okay.
Met her 6 years ago. Her name's Stephanie. And it's just one of those things where everything was just perfectly fit,
Yeah. And how many children do you guys have now?
3. So
Okay.
she had a daughter, Isabella, when we met. Isabella at the time, I believe, was 7. And, so that was very interesting and very natural for me to be a father, because even though I didn't come from a good situation, one of the things I always had in my heart is I always swore to myself I was never going to be that. I was never going to be that. And that was a fear of mine, that I was going to end up becoming that one day as a father, and that was a fear inside myself that I never really said to anybody, but it was like, man, I'm not going to be that. I am not going to be that. Whether it was my biological dad or the issues I used to have, confrontations with my stepfather. So that wasn't going to be me. So in order for it not to be me, you have to have the right one, because you obviously need to be married and you have to be in a good marriage. So lucky I just met my wife, Stephanie, and everything was perfect from day one. We just were inseparable.
Wow.
And
how old are your children? All 3 of them?
so Isabella now, she'll be 14. She turns 14 July 11th. It was natural for me, and I attribute that to my wrestling club and coaching my wrestlers, which we hadn't really talked about, but I have a wrestling club where I've had many kids that I started coaching at my gym at age 5, 6, 7 years old. And a lot of them are in college now. Many of them have gotten Division I scholarships and gone to amazing schools like Northwestern, University of Virginia, Maryland, Stanford, University of Nebraska. Nikkei Zinkin, who's the son, actually funny. I moved in with Harold when Nikkei was 2. And I was living with Harold when I first moved out here. Harold, because I was starting the business, was like, hey man, just stay at my house for a while till you get on your feet with the business. So for a couple of years, I stayed with Harold while we were building the business, and Nikkei was 2. So I was around his children, and I was around his family a lot, and observing their family and the way they did things really kind of taught me this is how a really good functional family should be. You know, they do Sunday dinners, they do vacations as a family to Bass Lake and certain things, and they're really tight.
Yeah.
And I saw that, and that kind of really shaped me. I got to witness that, being somebody who didn't grow up with that. That kind of was, I witnessed that, and I learned that, and then I also was around kids a lot, coaching, and these kids looked up to me, and they respected me, and I wasn't going to let them down.
Yeah.
Do something personal, you know. So I'm always there for the kids,
Yeah.
whether it's coaching them on the mat, doing my best to teach them wrestling.
Yeah.
When they get older, I'm involved in the recruiting process, talking to Division I coaches, because many of my friends and people that I used to compete against or I knew through wrestling are now head coaches, because we're all old. So they're head coaches now, or they're head assistant coaches at all the different schools.
Yeah.
So I can pick up the phone and call University of Michigan, call Nebraska, you know, call University of Maryland or Stanford, and say, hey, you know, this is somebody that I think you guys should look at it as a potential recruit. So learning through my wrestling club, which was like as a club, it's a family type thing almost. You get the kids at a young age, and you see them all the way through cradle, all the way to college, and you have the relationships with the parents. And something that's very interesting with my club, and almost every single one of my wrestlers, almost, not all, but I would say probably 95% of my wrestlers that were successful, they all have fathers. And many times both parents will come to practice, or the father's at every single practice, every single one of them.
Wow.
And there's been a couple of them that have gone on to the next level, maybe one or two that didn't have that situation that I could think of over the last 16 years. But almost, it's probably a 95% that the father is deeply involved, almost too much sometimes, where I have to, and I coach the fathers as well. That's part of my job, is coaching the fathers and letting them know, hey, let me do this part, you do that part.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So it almost sounds like to me, and let me see if I'm saying this right, is your lack of not having a father, and I'm going to call it a weakness of not having a father, has really become your strength today. It sounds like that has shaped you, you know, something. And so how would you respond to that?
I mean, I think so, yeah. You know, I think, you know, when I look at it now, and I'm parenting and I have my son, and to me, I can't even imagine. And I remember when my wife, we went to I have two boys, Caden is 2.
Oh, wow.
He turned 2 June 1st, and Lincoln is my son Lincoln is 5 months now. He was born February 1st, so he's only 5 months old. And I remember when we went to the ultrasound and we saw the first ultrasound, and I started crying.
Yeah.
You know, it was just seeing, it was incredible.
Yeah.
And it's unfathomable to me to not be a father, to not love that child.
Yeah. And
to
be a
not
part
be
of
there.
his life.
Yeah, and to be a part, and so I try to be the greatest father I could be. I try to love my son. I love Isabella. I try to be the best mentor and help her, and she wrestles. She wrestles at Alta. She's going to Buchanan High School.
She's going to be the best, I bet.
And she works hard, and I'm really proud of her, and I let her know when I'm proud of her, and I let her know when I'm not proud of her.
Yeah.
She comes to my practices as well, and then she'll go to she goes to her Buchanan practices, and she's got a great group of girls that she's bonded with on that team. It's really cute watching them all.
Yeah.
You know, to me it's unfathomable, but you know, I guess maybe some people just don't know how to do it. They don't. You know, but I think about if this would have been a different point in my life, maybe I would have been different.
Yeah.
I'm kind of maybe lucky that I'm an older father.
Yeah.
You know, because I've been through so much and reflected and grew. When I look back at myself as the guy that was in New York City back then, you know, probably wouldn't have been the same.
Yeah.
You know, everything happens for a reason, you know, so to speak. If you think of a higher power, you know, things get kind of, they're happening because this is the right time.
Yeah. Well, it seems like it's really shaped the person, the man you are today. And I could see a lot of blessings in your life. I think it's pretty exciting. Well, I want to thank you for showing up today. Can you tell our viewers how they can contact Dethrone, where your two locations are, and what's the easiest way to contact if they've got questions or want to come check out your facilities?
Yeah, I mean, they can call on the website. I actually have my personal number on the website because our company isn't open 9 to 5 like a traditional brick and mortar place. It's varied hours just because of our classes. So we'll be open in the mornings, and we'll be open in the late afternoons all the way till 8:30 at night with classes. So if you go to the website, dethronefresno.com, you'll see my number, and you can just give me a call, and I can set up a free class, or you can go on our website at the top of the website, dethronefresno.com. You can Google it as well if you're not sure. You'll see a tab for signing up for a free class. So the way we do it is everyone will come in. We'll have them come in for a free class because most people, they've never experienced mixed martial arts. You're
Right.
the average person, they don't know. They just know they want to maybe bring their kid in because maybe they're getting picked on at school, they're dealing with bullies. Maybe they feel like their kid is maybe stuck in the bedroom with video games too much, and they want them to get in the real world and do activities. Like when we were kids, we were doing activities.
Yeah.
Now kids are in the bedroom, doors closed, and they're playing video games, and they're on the internet, and you don't know what's going on there as a parent. And it's kind of good to bring them in the real world. And what training at my gym is going to help your child is going to introduce struggle, introduce controlled struggle, and struggle is good for human beings, for people. You know, throughout our whole evolution, we experience lots of struggle, and we have to overcome those things.
Yeah.
You know, whether you're, you know, we were cavemen trying to find food and
Yeah.
create fire, or nowadays in this modern life where we have so much abundance.
Yeah.
We have so much, you know, we can go to the store and buy our meat, buy our food, cook it right there, you know, electric, running water, all the different, you know, things that we're abundance and spoiled with in this day and age, this modern era.
We don't have to go hunt for it, right?
Yeah,
We
we don't
just
have
go
to
to the
hunt.
store,
Yes,
and there it
and
is.
We have plumbing. I mean, there's so many things like, you
Yeah.
know, you can do a whole podcast on that, but
Yeah.
you know, one of the things that you can do at our gym is sign your child up, and they're going to be introduced into struggle, whether it's through wrestling, whether it's through Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. They're going to have to learn how to, and they're going to have to sit down, watch a coach, whether it's a boxing coach, a Jiu-Jitsu instructor, a Muay Thai coach, who's going to demonstrate a technique, and then they got to go out there with their partner, their training partner, and practice the technique. And if they're not paying attention, they're not going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's going to teach them sitting there, watching, observing, and then doing it physically. Like I said, we have many different ways where we can appeal to different people, losing weight, confidence,
Yeah.
you know.
Okay, so you're at
Yes.
Shaw and Marks.
Shaw and Marks.
And the other one is
Clovis and Clinton Avenue.
Clovis and Clinton
Heading
Avenue.
out towards the airport, over on Clovis Avenue. If you head past Shaw, like you're going to go to the I-80, 180, I'm sorry, or the airport, we'll be right over there on the corner of Clovis and Clinton Avenue.
Okay, very good. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
What an honor to have you here. Thank you very much.